radar locks on. Too many. Too fast. The ink on the ceasefire agreement is barely dry, and Iran's drones are already airborne. This isn't a recap of 38 days of war. This is the anatomy of how a war doesn't end. Operation Epic Fury. 38 days, 10,000 sorties, 13,000 targets. U.S. Central Command remains forward deployed across the Gulf. B-2 Spirit bombers flew 30-plus hour round trips from the continental United States, threading contested airspace, arriving on target with one window, no second attempt. THAAD batteries stayed hot. Aegis destroyers held position. The joint force didn't stand down, it shifted to standby. Pakistan brokered the agreement. The terms, a 2-week ceasefire. The Strait of Hormuz reopens. Oil tankers pass. Commerce flows. But the real questions live behind those sentences. But here's what nobody saw coming. Hours after the ceasefire was announced, IRGC-linked drone units launched attacks against the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The message didn't get through, or it wasn't sent. Both possibilities are dangerous, for different reasons. IRGC operators sitting in hardened bunkers may have received no updated orders. Their command chain had been systematically dismantled over 38 days. 800 strikes in a single night alone had compressed Iranian military leadership down to its last functional nodes. If those nodes were gone, there was no one left to issue the stand down. No one left to pick up the phone. Saudi Arabia and the UAE absorbed impacts. Lavon Island, an Iranian oil installation off the Gulf Coast, was struck in response by an actor whose identity remains unconfirmed. Smoke rose from both sides of the waterway simultaneously. This is where everything changes. Now the numbers, because numbers are intelligence, not commentary. Over 38 days, U.S. forces dismantled the industrial architecture of Iranian military power. The South Pars petrochemical complex, the single facility responsible for powering Iran's ballistic missile program, not a random energy target, the nerve center of their long-range strike capability. Sharif University, domestically referred to as a research institution. In practice, the design and development hub for the Shahed drone series and advanced ballistic systems. The Shah-e-Najaf Naval Boatyard in Bushehr, the primary IRGC Navy facility for small boat construction and maintenance. Before strikes, operational. April 1st imagery, gone. 18 long-range bombers, 30 hours of flight, contested airspace. No other nation on Earth can execute this. The combination of B-2 strike packages, SM-3 intercepts from Aegis platforms, and ISR integration is not something you reverse engineer in a decade. Minute 4. This is the moment you need to stop and understand. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi released the formal ceasefire statement on behalf of the Supreme National Security Council. The language was precise and telling. Safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz would be coordinated with Iran's armed forces and subject to technical limitations. Read that again. Iran is positioning itself as the gatekeeper of its own compliance. Every tanker that moves through Hormuz moves on their clock, on their terms, at least in their framing. The ceasefire is real, but the architecture of leverage hasn't changed. And then, the signal went dark. IRGC units that launched post-ceasefire drones weren't rogue. They were disconnected. There's a difference, and that difference defines whether the regime that signs the next agreement is the same regime that controls what's in the field. 30 seconds from now, you'll understand why that matters. The nuclear file. The actual center of gravity for this entire campaign. Secretary Hegseth's statement from the Pentagon was unambiguous. The United States will never allow Iran to possess a nuclear weapon. The new Iranian leadership understood, according to U.S. officials, that a negotiated agreement represented a better outcome than the fate that awaited them under continued operations. On the table, Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. The United States is in discussions about verified dismantlement in exchange for targeted sanctions and tariff relief. This is the first time that zero nuclear as a hard condition has been placed in front of a functional Iranian government and met with something other than categorical rejection. Israel is operating on a separate track. The ceasefire, as publicly stated, does not apply to operations against Hezbollah. Iran has threatened to withdraw from the agreement unless Israeli strikes stop. This creates a parallel pressure front that the 2-week window must somehow contain or collapse under. This is not a peace agreement. This is a controlled deceleration of a conflict that is still moving. But Karg Island tells the real story. Just before the ceasefire formalized, U.S. forces struck military targets on Karg Island, Iran's primary oil export terminal. They didn't hit the oil infrastructure. That was deliberate. The message? We had the targeting solution. We chose not to use it. We can choose differently. The IRGC runs like a financial enterprise. Cut the revenue stream and the operational calculus shifts. South Pars powered the missile program. Karg funds the entire machine. Strike one and you degrade capability. Control the other and you control the institution. That's not bombing. That's economic ECM. Across the broader strategic landscape, the Hormuz closure had already demonstrated its global reach. When the strait shut, 25% of global oil transit went into uncertainty. Overnight futures dropped nearly $20 per barrel when it reopened. But prices remain above pre-war levels. Markets are pricing this as a pause, not a resolution. Meanwhile, the Ukraine theater continues to demand ATACMS stocks, Patriot intercept capacity, and F-16 sustainment. The U.S. Defense Industrial Base is simultaneously servicing 2 active theaters and 1 escalation watch in the Taiwan Strait. Beijing observed the Hormuz scenario in real time. A waterway closure, a carrier strike group response, an air campaign that erased a nation's integrated air defense architecture in 5 weeks. That's not lost on Taipei or on anyone in the Pacific Command AOR. So here's where we are. 13,000 targets struck. Ballistic missile production capability degraded for years, possibly a decade. The strait is open. A new Iranian government is at the table. But proxy networks, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iraqi militia factions, remain funded, armed, and operational. These forces don't live inside Iranian borders. They don't fall under the ceasefire's jurisdiction. If the deal holds but the proxies continue, the threat posture shifts geography. It doesn't disappear. 2 weeks. Islamabad on Friday. Pakistan in the chair. The joint force remains ready. The window is still open. For now. The question is simple. Do you believe the regime that signed this agreement controls what happens next? Or does the field decide? Drop your assessment in the comments. Because in 14 days, we'll know which one was right.
Ok, bravo, tu prends la place de Alpha. Allez, давай. Allez.
Alpha,
Alpha à moi.
Alpha.
Puis derrière.
Bah oui.
On rentre par l'entrée.